Okay, topic 8. Talking here about business processes and competitive advantages leveraging information systems. A couple things we're going to be talking about in this section is the concept of a productivity paradox and business processes. Describe kind of what is meant by when we talk about competitive advantage. Um, Also, we're going to circle back a little bit, talk a little bit about stuff we had talked about before with ERP system and how they relate to business processes and the idea of what's called business process reengineering. And then finally, we'll wrap up with kind of some comments around how business processes and information technology combined uh, bring and can possibly bring an organization some level of competitive advantage. Okay, so I guess at the outset here, talking about this, one of the fundamental challenges I think with IT organizations or organizations in general is that they've spent lots of money, probably trillions of dollars, have been spent over the years on information technology. The question is, has it really made a difference? Are things more, are we seeing the expected increases in productivity that were anticipated when the investment was at first proposed? And in relation to that, based upon the investment, are these organizations more competitive? So this is an article here you might want to take a look at. The idea of what organizations been doing in terms of these types of decision making. So what's described here is what we call the productivity paradox, which is everybody thinks that there's a that by making investments in technology that there are improvements. The problem is trying to figure out exactly what those are. All right, being able to, businesses like to operate, organizations like to operate on quantitative data, and trying to turn this stuff into quantitative measurements. Uh, Actually, quantitative and qualitative. Trying to define that has really been a challenge. There's been a lot of different questions around that. There's some studies we see here in '98 that there was a report that there was positive results for organizations, but I guess as compared to that, there was a gentleman, Nicholas Carr, 2003, came up and basically said that IT is really a commodity, and really basically what you want to do is do it as low cost and low risk as possible. So. And then there's also this idea of IT portfolio management. So there's a lot of thoughts going around, a lot of different research going on in this area, trying to answer the question is how much are we getting out of this investment? So the concept of competitive advantage has been around a long time in business. So it's not, you know, first started seeing it research probably in the 80s, where the idea would be to be able to achieve and have some sort of advantage um, that would result in an organization being able to sustain performance and profits that exceed industry average and be able to do that and I think the key word on this is sustain, be able to have sustainable performance. Um, Porter, so gentleman Michael Porter, we talked about him before with some of his work. One of the things he's done, he's did a lot of research around competitive advantage, research in that domain. And what he said was there's really two ways that organizations can get a competitive advantage. One is to achieve a cost advantage. Basically, you can do it cheaper than anybody else. And then the other one is differentiation. Now, differentiation can be anything in terms of branding, in terms of marketing, in terms of distribution. Now there can be an overlap between cost and differentiation. Differentiation could give you maybe some cost advantages, so it's not quite as cut and dried as you might look at. But there's really two. So those are the two things companies are really looking to try to achieve: some sort of do something that'll give you some type of cost advantage, or the ability to differentiate themselves in such a fashion that is also an advantage. So the question is now, how can IT influence that? So another thing that Porter came up with as he was kind of putting these models together, is this idea of a value chain. All right, so the idea would be is that, an organization, what he proposed that organizations should rethink the way they do things. And what they need to do is focus on defining, what are the steps that they need to achieve to deliver, to develop, produce, and deliver a product or service. All right. So the idea is that there are everything, everything that is directly related to the product or service you are delivering really is part of the value chain. So every step along the way should be able to add, as the term that gets used is add value. What is the value add for each step in the process? All right. So the idea is primary functions. So this goes into what they call the primary activities in the value chain, directly impacting. So if you make something, the things that are directly involved with making, which is the acquisition of the product, the the any sort of preparation work, any sort of work through the production cycle, through packaging, throughout the door, all of that stuff has a direct impact. All right, and then everything else is really considered to be support activities. So these things are things like human resources, or technology, information technology, or procurement. These are all activities which are not directly related, but are very important to be able to support the primary. So what Porter was basically saying is, organizations should restructure themselves in this fashion and rethink the way they approach their organization's operations. Another thing that Porter came up with, what he called the five forces, which is really a model of how organizations compete. Basically, if you're in the ecosystem of a organization, that there's different things that are coming at you, and to analyze your various strengths and weaknesses in relation to that. So there's the five forces that he defined is that you can have a substitute product. If you're making a product, you're always concerned about somebody coming with a substitute product or service that basically could be used to replace you in the market. You're always concerned about the bargaining power of suppliers, basically the people who provide, the organizations that provide the raw materials that you need to make things work. So you want that to be as low as possible. The bargaining powers of customers. Obviously, for customers, you want to be able to sell at the largest price possible. So, and there's a dynamic between both of those. So, companies are caught between, trying to reduce cost on the supply side and maximize revenue from the other side, from the customer side. Also, the barriers to entry. Ideally, organization want to be in a situation where they are protected. There's things that prevent other companies from getting into the business and being competitive with them. And then finally, the last thing is rivalry among existing competitors. So there's kind of a dynamic, there's a dynamism, as it were, around these five forces that, organizations are always trying to look for opportunities, and that's kind of where this the concept of the competitive advantage comes into play, kind of to counterbalance these different forces. So from an IT perspective, there's a couple types of things that company organizations have invested in, which are, we can help in, I guess, to the degree of being able to help counterbalance or countervail against the five forces, and also try to provide a bit of some degree of a competitive advantage for the organizations. And they are the four major ones. All right, four is a strategic information system, an EDI, electronic data interchange, collaborative systems, and decision support systems. So an SIS is really aimed at being able to provide the organization with the ability to deliver a product or service at lower costs, help deliver differentiated products or services, be able to help the organization focus on specific market segments or market niches that can be profitable, and also to enable innovation. The idea behind the strategic information system is it is very much aligned with what the organization is doing, and has particular focus on the ability to give the organization the ability to do things faster or cheaper. all right, or differentiate. So basically, being able to a type of system that would enable you to develop some type of competitive advantage. An EDI system, actually, EDI has been around a long time, though it's actually has evolved. It's actually has evolved over time. But basically, what it is computer to computer exchange of information between business partners. So the idea of, if you go back and you look at your traditional um, procurement process, a lot of it was a lot of paper. So people were typing out purchase orders and sending them around for approval, and then putting them in an envelope and mailing them to a vendor. And then, there was a process on the other side to do the opposite side, basically to um, take the order, register the order, pick, pack, and deliver the order, and then get the revenue from the sale. So there's the idea of using a computer to computer exchange is you streamline a lot of that. You can do it much faster. So the idea, what really happened was EDI had been around a while, but what we've seen over the past 20 years is this idea of basically using the same core technology as the ability to energize the supply chain. So basically, you develop an automated electronic connections between business partners on the supply chain, which really can give you a bit of a competitive advantage. It gives you the ability to do things faster, more accurately, and plus also if you're connected to your customer, it kind of gives you a bit of a lock-in. So a customer can't just go, if they're getting an advantage of being tied in electronically, they're not necessarily going to be inclined to maybe pull out and go to another company, easily. All right. Collaboration system. So this is we talked about this before around knowledge management. So the idea is really to enable people in the company to collaborate in different ways, to be able to kind of use different techniques to communicate. It used to be everything, organizations were, you had large organizations, they had large headquarters, because basically you had to put everybody in one spot because everybody had to be in the same place at the same time to collaborate. With electronic technology these days, that's not necessarily true. You can actually expand your collaboration very quickly, very expediently. And so the different things we see, different types of tools, email, chat, e-meetings, document sharing. This has really kind of broken it enabled organizations to break out from this idea of you always have to be in one place, because now you can actually create an organization that's virtually, basically people can be located in different places, around the world, and they can connect like they're in the same spot. So this is like, for example, the organization I'm with right now. We use this pretty extensively. I collaborate with people, both in the United States, around the country, and also around the world to do work. And I never meet them face to face, but I'm very much in contact with them. And finally, decision support systems. So we talked about this with Business Warehouse. We talked around these ideas of being able to make informed decisions. So business in general is all about making decisions. Um, and really what you want to achieve is what you want to be in a position of is making an informed decision. So computer decision support systems are designed around that, be able to take information, use modeling techniques and data, and try to provide an analysis that would support a decision. So you want a higher probability that a decision that is made is correct. So the idea of structured decision making based on information input is really important, as opposed to kind of winging it. And used to be, you'd see a lot of some organizations, people would be, well, I've done this for like 20, 30 years, and I know how to do it, and kind of do it by the seat of the pants. You may or may not get. You may get good results, but then again, you might not. So the idea of trying to put a discipline around it, trying to put a structure around it, is really what decision support systems are meant to provide the foundation to be able to do that. All right. So the idea is that it doesn't necessarily make all the decisions for you. All all right? But what it will do is it will provide, as we call here, semi-structured decisions. So ideas it can provide a lot, do a lot of the analysis, a lot of the details, being able to, do analysis to be able to pull a lot of stuff together. And then ultimately, the decision is made by, a person, a decision maker. So this is just a couple slides here around kind of what that process might look like. This is kind of an example of a formal definition of a decision-making process, of how, basically the different pieces of the process that happen within to agree within people's minds, but also, it's things that happen in people's minds that are also being done in systems. So the IT investment for competitive advantage, this is kind of the core issue. It can provide a competitive advantage. IT by itself, in and of itself, may or may not provide a competitive advantage. All right, so we use the word here, can. We can also use the word may. All right, it has to be chosen wisely. It has to be implemented well. It has to be leveraged correctly. All right, so you can make all sorts of innovations, and what's happened is the IT in a lot of areas has provided the ability to accelerate and amplify innovations, and particularly around process. So business process has been, when we go back and we look at like the ERP systems implementation starting back in the mid 90s and kind of running through today. What's happened is it's not simply the technology implementation, but those were also combined with things like organizations to bring them in line with what Porter had defined, and to define business processes to take advantage of the technology. And what organizations found was they were able to do it faster. They could do it with fewer people. They could streamline, take a lot of costs out and be able to deliver better service faster. So the idea is that, the systems by itself will not necessarily give an organization competitive advantage, but a system's implemented well and combined with process and business process and process management actually has been demonstrated to be able to do this stuff. All right, so there's a couple different areas here. This is just simply some different areas of IT investments for competitive advantage, some terminology, some different types of solutions that are out there, and a couple different approaches. One that shows up, I think I've seen a fair amount of, is this the IT balance scorecard. Risk analysis is another one, decision analysis. This is basically extensions. If you go back and we talked about our data mining and we talked about our business intelligence, this is where a lot of that stuff comes in. This is kind of the other side of it. This is the business side of it, the practices and techniques to be able to take the capabilities that these systems provide and be able to leverage them for advantage. So this is just a couple slides here. Ultimately trying to evaluate IT project risk and value. So the idea is, once again, the idea of making informed decisions. Once again, a model. So the idea of these models are, not necessarily gives you all the answers, but it provides a structure so you can gather, if you use these things correctly, what ends up happening is they provide as you gather information and organize it and structure it, it provides a platform or a framework to be able to make decisions. All right, it doesn't guarantee anything, but it does give you different approaches to be able to deal with large amounts of information in situations where you might not necessarily have a guaranteed decision. All right, so this is just like an example of from a cloud an analysis done on cloud computing, so like a risk-reward plot. So the idea of higher risk versus higher value. So a business process. So business processes have been around forever. All right, definition, right? Formal definition: series of tasks completed in order to accomplish a business goal. Organizations always use, everything is done through a process. If you think about it, it's multiple steps, followed of both people and systems, following through a series of tasks in order to get to an output. what was discovered, one of the big discoveries back in the 90s was that if you can adjust your business processes, there was a lot of opportunity to improve efficiencies through better business processes. All right, and the idea of being able to, you know, derive some type of competitive advantage was something which was seen in a lot of these projects that were involved with business process definitions. So, eliminates cost theoretically. If you can take cost out, you can either deliver lower prices or greater profits, depending upon the situation in the market you're in. So the way this is done, I mean, this was actually there's a lot of work that was done around this, kind of, mostly of it involves talking to people and kind of getting insight insofar as kind of what they do, where they fit into the process, and then being able to document it all. Not as easy as it sounds. I mean, theoretically, you just ask people and they tell you what it is and you write it down and it's there. The reality is, a lot of these things are uh, not quite as directly apparent. The flow is not directly apparent. So a lot of times you have to ask different kinds of people, get different perspectives, get better understandings of kind of what are the specific tasks, and more importantly, where are the decision points. It's decision points are always the key thing. What's the basis for the decision, and then what happens off of that decision? We talk a bit about there's a methodology, BPMN, which is basically uh, a standardized modeling technique, which is used to be able to develop a business model. And this is actually has become more. This is a standard, and I think we've seen a fair amount of it in the world. I think more and more you're seeing organizations using this as the means of defining their business processes. So the process management, the word here around systematic approach, I think is the key word, making organizational workflow more effective in agile and dynamic environments. Um, it's really the ability to, decision making that cannot be automated. Best processes to manage require decision making and cannot be automated processes that change based on circumstances. So there's a real dynamicism, the ability to, define it, but also be adaptable to change as things go. Right? Because I think one of the problems a lot of times, what would happen would be, the expectation was, okay, we defined our process and we just stay with it. And the reality is, there's business processes exist at a point in time. So as you look at, things this is what the business process looks like right now, and then as we go forward, it's going to look like something else because circumstances will change in order to maintain and sustain the advantage. So this idea of lean and Lean Six Sigma is process improvement. So you've seen a lot of organizations that have gone through and they've done their initial business process remodeling, business process reengineering, and then afterwards they'll come in with what they call Lean Six Sigma, which is a process improvement methodology, which it's a variety of different techniques. Lean was developed originally by Toyota, and Six Sigma, I'm not sure who was developed that, but both of those are basically process improvement techniques, measurements, a lot of statistical analysis around that. And what Lean Six Sigma is, it combines both of those together and kind of creates a methodology to implement that. Business process change. Um, Key thing is actually at the outset just figuring out where your business processes are, understanding what's out there, and then maintaining it and sustaining it on an ongoing basis. So the idea is not so much that it's a one-time activity, but it becomes kind of a way of life. Organizations that have kind of gone down this path and have made these changes, to get the benefits out of it, they have to kind of live it on an ongoing basis. So it's a restructuring, and I think this is one of the things that was so traumatic in a lot of ways around ERP implementations, is it really represented a big change for organizations. If not just it wasn't a one-time project, it was, okay, we're going to redo the way we're doing things. BPR, I think we've talked about that a little bit. Basically, its objective is fully understanding the goals and process and redesign to achieve improvements, product and quality. Basically, it's looking at your process, your current state, and then defining what a future state or your ideal process would be. A couple guidelines. So this has actually been evolved over time as learnings have come out of these BPR projects. A couple things these are more guidelines organize around outcomes, not tasks. Um, Treat geographically dispersed resources as centralized. There's a couple of things that have really come out as these things were kind of put together and as evolved over time. It still tends to be a fairly manual, arduous process. There's nothing magical about this stuff. This tends to be very hard work. ERP systems were a lot of times when they talk about business process reengineering, it aligned itself with ERP systems. So the business process reengineering was the kind of the change of the process or understanding of the process. The ERP system is the way it actually got implemented. All right, so it was developed with specific logic and rules. Um, One of the big things is it centralized a lot of stuff. So a lot of things that were distributed at various points all throughout an organization were then brought together and organized and coordinated together, which was a huge part in improving the process. So, what was happening is these systems are designed to do, as we talked about ERP before, it's designed to do almost everything. So it can do your order processing, it can do your manufacturing, it can do all the financial work, all the pieces are linked together so they all kind of operate as one. So ISO is a standard, a quality standard that has been out for a while. Organization, it's really a business process. The implementation of best process, and more importantly, the documentation of business processes. So the ability, to get certified, the organization must be able to describe their business processes. They need to be able to show them, through the documentation process, and to be able to prove it through documented records. So it's, once you go through this, it takes a couple months, but once an organization has it, then it becomes a bit of an advantage, something from a business perspective, an advantage for them. Um, you're working with customers and something around it also helps a lot of times. I think I've seen in organizations, it helps to kind of set the culture. All right. And that is it.